I'm going to kick off today's session. So welcome to you all. I am so excited about this collaboration with Active IQ. It's our first webinar of a series with, like I said, the amazing David Howatson. So it's all about positive behavior change and habit formation. Now, one of the reasons we thought about doing this collaboration, Active IQ and FitPro have been partnering for a number of years, and it was a lot of research, talking to employers about the things that we really want to always plug the gaps for you guys. So what I know is we wanted to get hold of amazing educators who really are at the front of this. And David's going to talk about, really up-to-date things and research. My introduction is going to be quick because you want to hit with that education, but I want to tell you a couple of things about today's session. It's going to be 60 minutes, and what we're going to do is reserve some time for your questions that you can pose to David. Now, where are you going to put those questions? You've seen the chat box. Are any of you writing in the chat box yet? It'd be really nice if you are. But with the questions, which we'll do at the end, can you put them in the Q&A box at the bottom? That'd be amazing. So I think you should definitely follow both FitPro and Active IQ with our social media. I know there's been a lot of buzz about this webinar, so it'd be really lovely for you to follow us both, but also, can you get some photos of today's sessions? Wherever you are, wherever you're joining us, it would be absolutely amazing. But I want to send a massive thank you to David for being the first of our educators on this webinar series, but a huge thank you to Active IQ for giving us this opportunity of collaboration, because I think collaboration is king. And I want to say thank you to all of you for turning up. So David, are you ready to get some amazing slides? I like his slides a lot. I want to. So can I get you to take over for me, and I'll be back at the end. I'm going to give him a frantic wave at about 15 minutes so we know that we're going to go to the Q&A. But I'll hand you over, David, with huge thanks. And I really am interested to see in the chat box where you're joining us from, but certainly get those questions in for David. So let's get you sharing your screen when you're ready.
Yeah, can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, that's good. It says I'm sharing.
When I said he's an amazing educator, no one said he was good on Zoom.
Yeah, no one said you had to share stuff. Yeah, it says I'm sharing it.
Let's have a look. Yes, I can see it. Can someone in the chat box also confirm that you are seeing? Yes, Katie, you actual angel, she can see. Yes, tickety boo, Stephen Wilson, lovely. Over to you, David. I'm out of here. Have a great one, everybody. See you soon.
Amazing. So that is the most complicated part over. The rest of this is really, really simple, really, really easy. Team, so we're going to try and keep this kind of a little bit task orientated. So I hope that you have pen and paper at the ready, or your phone to be able to take some notes. I'm going to get you to do a couple of things while we work away here. Again, feel free to fire in questions, write them down, take notes, and we'll cover those at the end. But today we wanted to try and really go through some practical strategies, give you a little bit of information or background around some habits, some behavior change ideas, then really look at things that we can practically put in place. So I'm coming from a gym background with now some sports psychology knowledge through my master's, but I'm kind of a gym monkey. So I'm kind of coming from hopefully a very similar background to you guys. So I'm coming from working with clients day to day and trying to figure out how to help them formulate some nice healthy habits and look at those maybe slightly less healthy habits or behaviors they have. So let's have a little look, team. So what we're gonna think about first, your first task, should you choose to accept it, is to get your pen and paper out. And what I'd like you to do is have a little look at a healthy behavior that you exhibit. So something that you have going on that you can tell us all is definitely something you hold on to as a day-to-day healthy habit. So give you an example, my healthy habit, I always have a glass of water in the morning whilst I'm making my cup of tea. Nice and simple, nice and easy, okay? So that habit is formulated through a chain of events. So I always get up in the morning, hopefully, it's always a good start. I always go downstairs and my habit is I make myself a cup of tea. But I think about What do I need to do to get my day going? I need to hydrate. So I've done a couple of little things to strategies to make sure that I always remember to hydrate, which is really simple. The cupboard above my kettle, there's some glasses. I always take one out. As I take my cup out, have some water. I'm hydrated. Easy. Doesn't sound complicated, but this is the whole point. This is how we start to build habit. What is the environment? What is the cue for the action? And how often do I do it? Is it repeatable? Okay. I want you to write down a nice healthy habit, but I also want you to write down an unhealthy habit. So something that you do every single day automatically that you might not think is the best of habits. So it could be anything, team. It could be picking your nose. It could be, well, I'll tell you, mine is this. This is my unhealthy habit, my phone. Okay. So I have a tendency, if I'm sitting around and my phone is in front of me, if I'm watching TV, I grab the phone. The phone's the thing that's always there. So the thing I try and do to make sure that I get out of that habit, keep my phone somewhere else. You guys know all the strategies. Keep it in a different room, put it on silent, put it to sleep, switch it off, do what you want to do. But again, there's that habit of just, I wonder what Teresa from FitPro is going to ask me today. Let's see if we can get some work going on. So that is my unhealthy habit. So what I'd like you to do, team, write down that healthy habit and unhealthy habit. And I want to just have it in your brain for later on when we come to some strategies, okay? But as part of the welcome, I want you to relax. We are not the experts. So what I mean by that is when we're working with a client, when it comes to behavior change, they are the expert. So they understand their behavior, they understand their movements, they understand their day better than you're ever going to imagine to think about or imagine understanding it. So they know what they're doing. They know when they get up in the morning. They know when they walk the dog. They know all the things that are routines that are in their day. So when we're talking to them about behaviors or we're trying to get a little bit of a map of how they behave, we want to try and always treat them as the expert. We are just the guide. Okay. So we're always going to think about behavior change as a guiding strategy rather than I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you what to do. If you want to do a bit of further research, then you can look at what's called the writing reflex. So the writing reflex or the expert reflex is that temptation to jump in with 2 feet and give your opinion on the best strategy, or this is what's going to work, or this is the best thing to eat, or here's the best exercise. It very rarely works. So the research will tell you that being a guide is always a better way to try and get that person to bring on healthier behaviors and healthier habits. So you can kind of relax from that standpoint. You are not in charge of the situation. You are not the expert. You are there to facilitate, there to help, there to guide. So you're a bit of a resource in that guiding sense rather than, I've got to come up with all the answers. I need to be the expert. Okay. So you're not the expert. You can relax. All right. Your role as part of this behavior change, habit formation style of coaching is to really control the volume. So can I help of the person identify those unhealthy habits and kind of just try and diminish them a little bit? Can I turn the volume down on those bad habits? And can I turn the volume up on the good ones? So it might be that we need to formulate lots of new habits for the person. But in actual fact, it's going to be very helpful to find out what are their existing good habits and try and build on those. Try and figure out what was the strategy that led them to that habit, or what were the situational sort of environmental features that led them to that habit. And we'll come to some of those later on. But that is kind of your role, team. So it's not about killing habits and creating new ones all the time. It might be trying to just amplify those good ones and slightly turn the volume down on those existing habits that have the kind of status quo of keeping the person in an unhealthy behavior. Okay. So let's look at a quick definition of habit then. I'll let you have a read at that. In essence, we're looking, a habit needs to be something that is fairly automatic. So we don't necessarily need to think about it. So if we have some physical habits, they might be things that we've picked up at a very early age. They might literally be motor control-based habits, walking, breathing, things like that. We know those are muscle memory or uncontrollable, and they're just built into us. But other habits might have just built up across time. So they come through reinforcement, and they're reinforced through reward, which we'll talk about in a little while, and repetition. So the more often I can repeat that habit or the behavior, the more it becomes habit. Yeah, but you guys know that that should be fairly standard, okay? It's something that is a learned behavior that is then repeated, okay? What we want to have a look at, which is maybe more prevalent from your perspective as coaches, as personal trainers, are goal-directed actions. So goal-directed actions are slightly different because they have an outcome in mind. So our goal-directed actions are there to try and help us get towards that destination or target that we want to get to. A really simple one would be a driving test. We know that we need to study, we need to practice, and the goal is we want to pass our driving test. So those habits that we might build in to try and study better or to try and take more lessons would be a way of directing towards that goal. So those are less automated. They are less likely to just happen spontaneously. There needs to be a little bit of planning around it. We might need to play around in the environment we're in, and they need a little bit more education around them, a bit more of a drive, a little bit more of a goal, a little bit more motivation. But this is how we tend to operate in fitness. So the things that we go after in terms of trying to help people's habitual behavior is really goal-directed action rather than habit a lot of the time. So just want to have that in mind once we start talking about movement or we start talking about some strategies, okay? So what do we do well? This is a kind of fitness industry sort of encapsulating, from my experience of 20 years of teaching trainers, what we do well are some really cool things. So we're all very good at giving some basic nutritional advice. Some of you might be nutritionists, which is awesome. I'm not. I have a level 4 sports nutrition qualification, but it's not really my area of expertise. But we can give people that advice on portion control, on hydration. We can talk to them a little bit about the macronutrients. We might start talking to them about when to eat, all that sort of cool stuff. And we're good at that. We're good at kind of packaging that information and giving it to the masses. And some of you guys will be even better at making that really specific from person to person and from sort of client to client. So that basic advice is something we do pretty well. The other thing we do well is that knowledge around movement, the knowledge around the anatomy and physiology. We know about intensities and durations and all this sort of cool stuff. And we can come up with all sorts of weird and wacky exercises for people to do. So again, that's another reason why someone would come to us to try and help shape them on their journey, maybe play around with their behavior change a little bit, but we're really very good at that, focusing on physical activity. Enthusiasm, whoop, whoop. We're all pretty enthusiastic, right? We're all pretty smiley. We're all pretty friendly. We welcome people in, we get them moving, we're happy. They want to come to us partly because of our personality and what we can offer them. And we can offer additional skills on top of that. So thinking of an additional skill would be something like, how do we get that person to imagine what the behavior that we're going to try and change, what does that look like in the future? So how does the thing we're talking about now, how does that change us in 6 months? Can I imagine how that's going to look if I trust you and buy into your behavior change, okay? So we're going to play a little game, team. We're going to do a little bit of imagery, okay? So we're going to have a little mental skills section. So what I'm going to get you to do is close your eyes for me, please. And as you've got your eyes closed, I'm going to get you to stand up if you are able. If you're able to stand up, then this will hopefully work a little bit better for you. But if you're not able to stand, I'm happy for you to be seated. Close your eyes. And what I'd like you to do, team, is you're going to imagine that you're on a basketball court. Okay? I want you to think about how the flooring feels. Are you in those big, thick basketball shoes? Have you got that wooden floor underneath you? I want you to have a little bounce up and down on that wooden floor. See if it's a little bit springy. Okay? I want you to imagine that surface. And then I want you to think about holding onto the ball. So if you're standing at the moment or you're seated, I want you to just grab that ball for me. And I want you just to feel the surface of the ball. So as we know, that basketball should have a little bit of texture to it. And I want you just to take a couple of big, deep breaths in as you're holding that ball. And I want you to give it a couple of bounces on the floor. So you're just going to bounce and catch, bounce and catch, bounce and catch, just as you have those eyes closed, as you're thinking of that flooring, as you're thinking of that ball. And then I want you just to think about the environment around you. So is there a crowd? If you've got a crowd, how many people have we got? And Teresa, I hope you're doing this as well. Hope you're imagining the crowd in your epic mansion. And I want you to think about, what is the noise of that crowd? What do you hear as you're bouncing that ball? Can you hear the crowd? Can you hear the ball bounce? And then we're going to be underneath the hoop. So we're going to take a shot. We've got 3 free throws here. There's been a penalty, and it's our chance. So we're going to keep bouncing that ball, and we're just going to take a couple of deep breaths. I want you to have a little look up with those eyes closed, and I want you to think about the hoop. How far away is it? Does it look good? Does it look nice and open and easy to hit as you're bouncing that ball? Cool. Now I want you to take a couple of big, deep breaths for me. Keep bouncing that ball. I want you to take your first shot. You're going to throw. Good. Take that ball again. Give it a bounce again. Take a deep breath. You're going to take your second throw and shoot. Good. And bounce again. A couple of deep breaths. Last time, go and shoot that ball. Good. And relax. Now, did we score every time, or did you miss? So you can put it in the chat. You can think about it. What I'm hoping is that you're able to imagine that you were successful, that you're able to picture what success looked like, and that you're able to shoot and score. So when we're trying to do all these things in terms of enthusiasm, in terms of our advice that we put out, in terms of our exercises, we're always aiming for something, right? We always have a target. We always have a goal. Using a little bit of imagery at the start can get that person into that mindset of being successful. If we start the person with negativity, or we start digging into what are their bad habits straight away, or what are their bad behaviors, or the behaviors that have been inhibiting them straight away, then we might start to inhibit their behavior before we even got started. So we might not help them see what the future looks like, see what that progression is, see what is in the future for them, and how do I picture that very clearly. If they can picture it really clearly in their mind, they're more likely to start wanting to get these steps. If they're still in that sort of contemplation phase of, yeah, I'm thinking about doing something, but I'm not too sure, I'm not too fussed yet, I know I should do something, but there's kind of no action there. Can we help them imagine what the future looks like? Obviously, that's in a sporting context. We use it a lot working with golfers, basketball, football. It gets used a lot with athletes, but a little bit of imagery around that person. What do they look like when they're sitting on the beach in 12 weeks' time? What do they look like for their wedding in 2 years' time? Try and get that tangible imagery going on in their head, and try and get them to either physically go through that action or even write it down. Get them to build that picture as much as possible. With all of that being said, team, what do we miss in the fitness industry? So what are the gaps? Where do we fall down a little bit? So we're all individuals, we're all different. We all have our personal preferences and biases. And at the moment in the research, that if you have a quick look at the research over the last 5-6 years, there are around 109, which is a random number, different types of bias that we have, that we experience day to day. So that could be anything like something weird, like the IKEA bias. So the IKEA bias is, if we build something ourselves, we automatically think it's better or it's great. Yeah. So we have this notion that something we create is actually better than it is. Okay. And obviously you've got to self-build everything from IKEA. So that's where the name comes from. What we're going to think about is a little bit around what do we miss within fitness. So one of the biases we have is a movement bias, or a bias towards a certain type of training. So some of you guys might love high rocks. Some of you might love playing golf. Some of you may love running, lifting, whatever it is. And hopefully we try and fight the temptation to just prescribe that type of training to everyone. But it can inevitably start to leak into our how we move or how we prescribe movement, okay? So our next little task, team, let's think about bias. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're able, I want everyone to stand up, okay? In fact, I'm going to do this as well. We're going rogue here, Teresa. We're going to move the camera. 1 second. You're going to get a very good view of my hallway here. Look at that. Can you see me?
We can see you.
Beautiful, right. So team, here's what you're going to do. I would like you to stand up and we are going to perform a really simple movement. We are going to try a lunge, okay? So here's what I'd like you to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just want you to perform a lunge and you're going to do 5 reps, okay? So give me 5 lunges, team. Go, 5 lunges. I'm going to wait. Beautiful, right. I'm going to assume you've done your 5 lunges. And my question to you is, which direction did you choose? So in my experience, when we do this practically with a group of PTs or a group of students or even a group of athletes, they tend to give me one of 3 things. They either lunge straight forward, yeah, or they might lunge backwards, yeah, or they might choose to go side to side, yeah. So they may decide to lunge side to side in frontal plane. So what does that tell me? If the majority of you guys have lunged forwards or back, or just side to side, then what it shows me is there's an inherent bias that we kind of get from day one when we first learn how to lunge. It's going to be the same thing for a squat, very similar for a push-up, but there's that tendency to always move in the sagittal plane because it's the easiest plane to move in. There's always that tendency as well because as we were instructed, we got told all the little teaching points that go along with the lunge. So we automatically, that becomes ingrained because we do it over time. We teach it, we've learned it, it goes and it goes and it goes, yeah? However, is that the most functional lunge? Is that the lunge that my client needs to do for their goal? It might well be. It could be the best lunge in the world for them. However, there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different ways to lunge, but without thinking about it, if you automatically lunge in that direction, that shows me you have a movement bias based on the environment you're in and based on how you've been taught. So you've learned that behavior. And when we talk about environment, team, I've got my cup of tea down here. If I'm going to reach for my cup of tea in a lunge, I'm unlikely to turn and do this and pick it up. Yeah. I'm more likely to go through a rotational lunge and do this and pick it up. Okay. So we could have lunged any direction around a clock. We could have gone 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, forwards and back. We could have gone side to side, 9 and 6. We could have gone to 7. We could have gone to 2. We could have gone to 1. We could have moved in any way we wanted to move. But that bias that's inherent, that habit we have, is to think lunge, forward and back, or maybe side to side. Yeah. It gives me a good insight with a client and with a coach. I'm going to move back as to what their preferences are for movement. Yeah. So what are their innate bias based on how they move? And how are they likely to behave based on how I ask them to move? So if I suddenly ask them to do a big rotational lunge or squat in a different foot pattern from what they're used to, how are they going to respond? How are they going to react? Are they likely to take on that behavior? Or are they going to think, this is a weird dance move, I'm never going to do that type of lunge, that looks ridiculous. However, in the environment, it might well be the best thing for you. So we have those biases. We have that, I don't want to look silly, or I don't want to upset the apple cart, or I really love CrossFit, so everyone I teach is going to do CrossFit, or I love yoga, so everyone I teach is going to do yoga. Yep, so we need to think about those biases. The other thing we have a tendency to do is obviously follow trends. That's natural in the fitness industry because of money, money, money. We need to follow the trend. We need to be up with what the facility down the road's doing or what this really successful PT is doing. What does the research tell us? If the trend is scientifically sound and if there's a basis for doing it, absolutely, let's go. However, then means we tend to chop and change a lot. If you own a fitness facility, it's expensive. You might have put this year's most beautiful, brand new, sparkly, big piece of equipment in. And then in 18 months' time, the trend changes and people don't want to do that type of strength training anymore. They want to do this type of strength training. Again, it becomes confusing for the client. It becomes a little bit confusing for us. So again, if there's a constantly changing environment, it is then difficult to build new habit. It can be helpful for breaking bad habits, but it can be difficult to build those real structured, safe, sort of healthy habits if we're always changing and always trying to move with the times way too much. Yeah. The other thing we tend to do as well in fitness sometimes is to just kind of provide empty information. So it's not useless information, just a little bit empty. We don't need any more cookbooks in the world. We know that broccoli is good for us. Your member knows that broccoli is good for them, but they might still not choose broccoli. They might still just choose chocolate. That's habit, that's preference, that's the reward. So actually giving them the information, when you think about what is the information, is it useful? And is it information that they're going to be able to take on board and actually put in place? Or is it stuff they already know and actually they're not going to take that on board because they already know it and it's not worked for them in the past? Yeah. Over-promising is the other thing we want to think about, folks. So again, you guys will be very good, hopefully, at making sure that someone has a goal that is long-term as well as those chopping into short-term goals. We don't need to go into SMART goals here, but I'm assuming that everyone has their strategy for goal building with clients. But again, as an industry, we tend to overpromise. So we make promises based on how quickly change can happen. And I'm going to ask you a little question in a second about how habits form and how long it takes. And again, there's a lot of misconceptions, lots of different myths around that. And same with anatomy and physiology. How quickly can the body adapt? How quickly can it change to X, Y, or Z goal? As an industry, a bit of a tendency to make these things sound like they're going to happen very quickly, or we've got all these facilities. We've got swimming pools, we've got tennis courts, we've got PTs, we've got this, we've got that. Fundamentally, if the person doesn't want to use them, then they just sit there. Yeah. And if we overpromise, they won't come back. So if you don't reach their goal in 12 weeks, they ain't going to come back. But you know that already. And hopefully you know that we're kind of guilty of this as an industry. All right. Which one of these two animals are you, team? This is based on who we see in the fitness industry and what types of facility we see in the fitness industry. So going back to that chasing the trend, are you the magpie? Do you see those shiny objects and chase them? Oh, that's new. I'm going to go and try this. Or I've heard this thing on Instagram, or I've seen it on TikTok and it looks amazing. I'm going to go and chase that trend. I'm going to go and try, and that's my new thing. Are you a bit more of an owl? Do you take your time? Do you have a little look around? If your head can spin, then I'm worried. But if you have that look around, you consider. Do you think about it? Do you take your time, and then do you still stick to your guns? Maybe take in a little bit of information here and there, but you're still focused on the mouse that you're going to try and eat for your supper? Or you're the magpie who's chasing everyone else's supper or something that looks nicer over there. You're going to go and steal it. I ask that because that's going to be slightly determined on what type of client you're going to be able to work well with. So if you're very good at adapting, or you're constantly changing, you're constantly looking around, that can be quite difficult to try and help someone build in that long-term change. If we're always trying to chop and change, or oh, this is a new thing, forget what we did last week because I've read this and this is the new cool thing. Or are we a little bit more considered? Okay. So a question for you as well, team, is how many days do you think it takes to build a habit? So for a habit to stick, how many days do we think it takes for that to happen? I'm going to have a look in the chat box. 66 days, 28 days, 30 days, 21, 3 months, 80. Jeez, this is the worst game of bingo ever, isn't it, T? So, yeah, person dependent, it varies. Yeah, this is good. So, lots of different answers in the chat box, team. So, this is what the research says. So, currently, when we're looking at the topic of habit and habit formation, then it's going to take around about 66 days to reach that automaticity, so that making that action or behavior become automatic. But as you can see from the literature, depending on the person, depending on the type of habit that we're trying to formulate, then it's going to take anywhere from 18 to a couple of 100 days. Okay, so there's such a variation within the research, partly because there are too many different strands of research looking at so many different things. 66 days is a kind of good rough number to think about. So that commitment of that action that's repeatable, that we're working with every single day, it's going to take around 66 days on average. Might take longer, could be shorter, but that's where we're working with. Okay. So any books that tell you it's 21 days, that's kind of an outdated sort of business economist type chat or research that's come from a while ago. That's kind of been debunked pretty much in the kind of literature that you'll come across these days. Okay. So let's have a little bit of a chat about habit formation, team. Then we're going to jump into the really good stuff. The stuff is how do I actually break these habits? So when we're forming a habit, what we want to have a think about is that it's going to vary depending on context. So my context for me drinking my water is based on me moving house, moved house, new kitchen, new areas, place to put things. It means now I have that system built because I moved. Because in my previous place, I didn't have the same setup. This setup is a little bit more optimal for me. So the habit formation requires a kind of stable, unvarying context. So once you're in that context, once you're in that environment, it needs to be as stable as possible. And what we mean by that is something that is, when it's repeatable, it's going to happen every single day. So when we talk about the strategies for trying to build behavior or help build habit, that consistency is what we're looking for. It's that consistency within the context is the real key thing. Okay. It happens then in 4 stages. What we want to look at is if we're trying to build a new habit, the person has to have made that decision. It needs to be a decision to take action. If anyone's done anything on motivational interviewing, to which I am building a course right now for FitPro, you'll know that people have different stages of change. So if that person is not in an action phase or a contemplation phase, or if they're in pre-contemplation, where are they at in terms of their goals? They need to have made that conscious decision to formulate the start of the habit. Okay. What we then see during stage 2 is if they've transitioned into action, so they want to take action, they want to go for it. One of the things that starts to happen is this intentional behavior gap. So you guys might have had it before where you've had a client come in, you've had the chat, they've agreed to join you, they've agreed to work together to whatever their goal is going to be. They're about to pay, they're about to sign up, and then they disappear off into the ether and you never hear from them again. That's that intention behavior gap. So they've had the intention, but actually there's no action. So what we're going to talk about in a little while is how do I counteract that with some planning? So what are the things I can do in planning to make sure the person doesn't disappear, or that I bridge that gap of intention to action? And again, like we said, the behavior must be repeated over time, and it needs to happen in a very specific way, in a specific loop, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay. So habit loops. So how are these things formed? So the reason I've got popcorn on there is partly because I love popcorn, but there's some good research, and one of the things that pops out in terms of a habit loop, and partly down to the environment of how the person works. And I've got a couple of references at the end, team, which I can share with you. But there's a good study by Neil and colleagues, and those guys were looking at behavior in terms of nutrition and popcorn. So, and I related to this because I love me some popcorn. So when we go to the cinema, the smell of the popcorn, the environment of being in the cinema, being in that dark room, the movie, everything that goes along with it, there's a compulsion for people to eat popcorn. I've got that compulsion. And what their study found was that even if the popcorn was stale, they would still go and buy and eat the popcorn in that environment. So if you took those participants out of that environment and they had put them into a conference room and served them fresh popcorn, they ate less fresh popcorn than they would stale popcorn within the cinema. They then gave them some stale popcorn in the office environment and they refused to eat it flat out. Don't want it. It tastes rotten. But in the cinema, boom, no problem. Don't care. It's popcorn. I'm going to eat it. So that is a habit loop. That is the cue of being in that environment, the smell, the building, I know I'm in the cinema. The behavior is to go and buy that popcorn because that's the chain of events. And the reward is popcorn tastes good, right? There needs to be a reward. For me to build that behavior and let it stick and become habit, there needs to be a reward. So food is one of the easiest places to get that reward. That then builds back into that cue. So I recognize that cue when I go into the cinema of, I'm going to eat some popcorn. Doesn't matter what movie I'm going to see, doesn't matter how long it is, doesn't matter what cinema I am in, I am eating popcorn every single time. It's a habit, yeah? And it's developed over time, only in that specific setting, in that specific environment. If I'm at home, I'm way less likely to do that. So what we want to be thinking about is, what are the cues? So you guys have written down some healthy and unhealthy behaviors or habits that you currently have. What we need to think about is, what is the cue for that behavior? What sparked that behavior at the start? Now, if it's a long-term pre-existing habit, you might not be able to remember what the initial cue was, but hopefully you can identify the cues of when these things occur. So, for example, if someone smokes and they're a casual smoker or a social smoker, then it might be that there's a specific amount of alcohol that they have that leads them to smoke. So the cue is the alcohol, the environment, they're with their friends, and then I'm going to have a smoke. Or the cue could be external from one of the friends. Their friend smokes and they drink. Yeah, I'll come outside with you. I'll have a smoke as well. And then that behavior gets reinforced because the reward is, I get the smoke, I get the environment, I get to have a laugh with my pals. I quite like being drunk. It's great. We have a party. The next day, you feel rubbish. You wake up, you feel horrible. You're never going to do it again. We've all said that. However, the cue then sparks again, same environment, same cue, the behavior in that loop. So we need to try and interrupt the cue when we come later to talk about how do we break these habits. Yeah. So planning. How do we try and break down some barriers in terms of their habits, formulating new ones and taking others away? So the reason there's some chewing gum on there is because, again, another really, really simple habit. When I get into the car, I have chewing gum. Every time I get in the car, boom, chewing gum was in my mouth. I don't think about it. It is an automated response. I don't chew chewing gum anywhere else. Don't do it in the house, don't do it at work, don't do it when I'm running, nowhere else, only in the car because it's there. It's environmental. That's the environment I'm in. That's easy access, go. If I put the same box of chewing gum in my kitchen, I'm way less likely to go and take that. Yeah. So what are the things we can plan around to stop me from doing that? Easy, take chewing gum out of the car. All right. But then when I'm in the car, I'm going to be looking for it. As soon as that's empty, I go and get some more, put it back in the car. Yeah. So we want to be thinking about, can we plan around that person's day to try and take out some of these little nuances, take out some of these things from their environment. So when we're building this plan, team, here are some key steps. And if anyone's done any motivational interviewing, they'll recognize some of these key steps. So the first one to think about, team, is, again, back to that thing we said at the start. They're in charge. They are the expert. What do they think the first step should be? So let's say that their bad habit they present you with is smoking. Yeah. Now, it's difficult because a lot of behavior change science comes from addiction, smoking, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. But it could be one of these things that filters into as an unhealthy habit. So we need to try and figure out, what is their perception of what needs to change and what is their perception of how to change it. We could really quickly go, well, actually, I've had a client before. Here's my experience. Here's the answer. Here are the things that I understand, and this will probably work for you. That's all well and good. But if they don't have that intrinsic motivation, or even that belief within their head of, well, I don't know where to start, then it can be difficult for that person to get on that journey. So we need to really try and pull that from them first. So the key first step is, what do you think you should do? What do you think is the first course of action for us? Yeah. That then sparks some ideas. The next stage would be to try and really have the approach of what we call ask, offer, ask. And what that means is it tries to build a little bit of self-confidence, self-efficacy, and a little bit more agency for them, a little bit more control for them. So if I just run straight in with my opinion, or give them this handout, this leaflet for what they should do, or direct them to this piece of education or whatever it might be, I need to ask first. Sounds a little bit simple, but if I take, let's say Teresa's got a bad habit. Let's say Teresa's bad habit is picking her nose. I'm going to assume she doesn't. Yeah, she does. She definitely does. Then if I just run in with, here are all the reasons why picking your nose is bad and here are all the things you should do, she might still be a little bit ambivalent and she might think, actually, I quite like picking my nose. It's great. It's awesome. What's not to love? Whereas if I ask her during conversation, is it okay for me to give you some ideas? Because you've given me those ideas at the start when we asked you what the first step was. If you ask for permission, then offer the information, and then ask if that information is helpful or if they would wish more information or further conversation, then again, it gives them control over the process, gives them control over, well, if I'm going to build this habit or try this new type of behavior, they need to feel like it's come from them, and it should come from them. Yeah. So absolutely, you have information, you have knowledge, you want to impart that knowledge, but it needs to be done in the right way in the correct setting. So we need to ask, offer, ask. And then the last thing when it comes to the sort of beginnings of planning team is offering a menu of options. Sometimes we can be very strict or quite narrow with our approach. So we want to think, can I give this person some choice? Again, it's autonomy. If they have choice in habit or behavior change, then again, they're more likely to follow that choice because it's the path they have chosen. If I say to Teresa, there's only one way to stop picking your nose, she might not believe me, or she might not think it's possible. It might seem too hard. It might seem too far away. If I say to Teresa, well, here are three options, good maths, three options for you to stop picking your nose, then she can choose. I'm going to give her three that are all scientifically proven to stop her picking her nose, or based on my experience of nose picking. I don't know why I picked nose picking, but it means that she has three really valid options, but she's going to choose the one that suits her best. Yeah, which is what we want, which is what we're after. It's a little bit more control for her over the process. Okay. So these are some of the little things that I call pins, guys. So in terms of a strategy, so these are the things to help stick when it comes to behavior change. So when we're building the cues, we want to try and build them around events in the person's life. So get an idea of what their routine is, get an idea of exactly what their day looks like in terms of their habits. So the good habits that you have written down and the bad habit you have written down, think about the environment that you're in when this happens. Think about what the cues might be around that. So if you're really good at flossing after you brush your teeth, think about the sequence that gets you there. Yeah. So hopefully brushing your teeth is the first part of that sequence. But if you forget to brush your teeth, are you still going to floss? It's unlikely. Whereas if you can get the sequence correct, then you're more likely to repeat the sequence, which then means the behavior is more likely to become habit. So what are the things that are built into that person's day that always happen? So you always read to your kids at night, or you always go to sleep at a certain time, or you always wake up at a certain time, or you always have to drive to a certain place at a certain time. Let's build those behaviors around that routine and around the environment. Because if I try and give you behaviors that don't fit into that routine or fit into that environment, they're just going to say, no thanks. It's not going to work for me. Or they're going to think it's going to work for them. And that intention gap kicks in where they don't actually fulfill those tasks that we've talked about. That then feeds into that sequence. So can I build habit based on the sequence? So I get into my car and I eat chewing gum, or I have a fruit bowl that sits in my middle of my kitchen, but what is the sequence? When do I go into the kitchen? When do I interact with it? When does it happen? Where does it happen? I know that I drink my water because I've put the kettle on. That's the preceding action. So let's get a bit of a map with the person as to what the actions are that they take place before they go for that healthy habit. So before you go for your run, what are the things that spark you going on that run? Yeah. Something that you probably do unconsciously is that coping planning, or what we call a pre-mortem. So this is quite big in the business world and quite big in economics, and also quite big around training athletes, is trying to almost get a little bit of a checklist of the things that could go wrong. What are the potential barriers? Now, this is something that you might not necessarily share with the client, because you want to try and internalize this a little bit to shield them from it, because you don't want to spark an unintentional barrier. But if you can do a bit of a pre-mortem, so if Teresa's told me that she has X, Y, and Z happen in her life, I need to try and preempt, okay, there might be certain weeks where she might not see me, or there might be certain weeks where she doesn't fit in. There might be certain times where she is unable to achieve certain things. So I need to preempt those as much as possible. Okay. And we need to start with the wins as well. So satisfaction. So is that person happy to proceed? Are they happy what the outcome of that behavior might be? Are they confident with what the behavior is? Are they confident that they are self-directed? Do they have that autonomy? So have I given them choice? Have we talked about it based on their understanding of the situation and based on their expertise? Have I listened more than talked? Is the question I always ask myself with a client. So has the information, has the idea come from them? Yeah. Start with the win, start with where they're going to be successful, start with the easy things that they can change that they have come up with. Yeah. And guys, as you probably know, because I'm sure you have all sorts of apps and cool different tests that you do with people, testing technology, your friends. So algorithms are there and designed to help reinforce behavior. Real simple one is Netflix. YouTube, these things are fed by how much time you spend on these platforms and what you choose to watch. That will then send you based on your activity. So same thing, if we have the technology to be able to nudge people in certain directions in terms of how often we contact them or what type of information they see from the app that we use, whether that's Fitbit or Nike or whatever app that you tend to use with your clients or they use, when are they being nudged? When are they being pushed towards? Okay. And then, folks, the last thing I want to talk about really quickly, because we're going to run out of time, is how do we diminish that behavior? So one key thing that I try and use is to try and focus not necessarily on always trying to kill something in terms of a bad habit, but we want to try and do what we call creating a discrepancy. All right. So this is my favorite guy, Columbo. So the Columbo approach is to, at the start, get your client to have a list of values. So you can have a sheet or a app or however you want to do it. Get a list of values that person might have. So Teresa, for example, might have family, fitness, she might have health, she might have travel as her key values in life. How do I then set my values with what my behavior is currently? So if my current unhealthy behavior, the question to Teresa, if she says, yeah, I love going out on a night out, I'm a binge drinker, it's great, it's fantastic. My question or my statement to her would be, okay, so how does that sit with your values? How does that affect your family? How does it affect your fitness? How does it affect your wellness? What that will do is it will let her see that her current behavior or current actions that are maybe less desirable, how are they affecting the outcomes within her life? How do they affect her values? If they don't sit with her values, then hopefully she recognizes that as a discrepancy. So then she sees that what she needs to do is to change her behavior to be more in line with her values. So this is something I will repeat with clients or people that I'm working with across time. So we'll do it at the start, and then we'll look at it again, maybe 6 months' time, maybe even a year down the line. Are the values the same? Are their behaviors geared towards their values, or have they gone off the beaten path? So if you're going to keep smoking, how does that affect your family? That's a value. That's not a goal. That's an ingrained personal value that person hopefully holds on to and is massively valuable to them in their life. So that will hopefully spark a little bit of change. Okay. So we've run out of time to go into that in depth, guys. But that is part again of sort of motivational interviewing. So can we establish that at the start? What is the person's value? How does that unhealthy habit sit with them? And how does it mesh with what their goal is going forward? Okay. So just quick takeaway tips, team, because we're going to run out of time. Relax, you're not the expert. Start with why, get the information from the person, build the habits around those pins, around those daily cues that we can try and get working. Make sure it's self-directed, and always ask, offer, ask is my biggest piece of advice. Okay. That was quick. Thank you.
You did that last bit really, really quickly.
I know that was the bit I wanted to spend most time on, but I was too busy lunging. I get in with the lunge.
I know, and I think it was Stephen who pointed out that you need to do some balance work, my friend. Anyway,
Yeah, I had a little stagger. It's because
yeah,
this is
you
not
did.
tea, this is Guinness.
Yeah, we know about your teacup. I was just trying to subtly put something in the chat box to say, please, can you get your questions in for David? But I'll say it to you instead. But thank you so much. There's loads of comments coming in the chat box. Amazing. Thank you, David. So please do follow David. I've already tagged him in some posts. I'd love to get some posts from you guys. If you haven't already grabbed a picture, guess what? You're going to stop sharing your screen if you don't mind, David, so they get to
Yes,
see
I will
our
do that for you.
faces in full glory. Look at that. Hurrah! So thank you everybody for being here. We've had hundreds be part of this. So that's fantastic. So should we go with some questions?
Let's do it.
You've had a sip of your tea, right? So, okay. So Claire came up with one quite some time ago. Thanks for this, Claire. It says, when doing the imagery, can we add sort of auditory, kinesthetic stuff so that they hear things like your friends and what your friends and family might say, how you're feeling?
Yeah, perfect. So a lot of the time I can only take my experience from working with athletes. So a lot of the time it's quite good to just put them into that environment or as close to the environment as you can. So it's absolutely great to put in some music or put in some. So a lot of the time you might even send that person a voice note to listen to. It could be your voice that sparks something in them. It could well be the environment. It could be laying on the grass. So that environment is really, really important. So it's a great point. Anything you can put in there that's going to be a cue for the person to get into that mindset is absolutely going to be useful. So yeah, anything auditory, anything that is sparking touch, anything that's going to spark environment is awesome.
Fantastic. We're seeing some things in the chat box. If you've got a question, put it in the Q&A box because I can't look in two places at once. I'm very excited. Right, Katie, brilliant one. As a group instructor, can she use any of these tips in a class setting?
Yes. So I suppose what you could do is, depending on what the class is, so let's say, for example, it's a holistic class, it's something like yoga or it's stretching based, then we could try and let's take one of those movements or exercises or breathing patterns and let's link it to something outside. So let's link that breathing pattern that we do at the end of the class. Can we do that while the person's sitting in the car at the traffic lights or stood having a cup of tea? We just present it to the whole class and give them a tangible place to link it to. So it needs to be linked to an environment or context, because saying this is how I want you to breathe is awesome, but as soon as I leave, there's no tag for that. There's nowhere for it to stick. So give me somewhere for that place for it to stick. So absolutely, yeah, you can do it with a full class. Not a problem.
Lovely. If we don't get to all your questions, because there's loads coming in, please do send them to me, teresa.w@fitpro.com, and I'll get them over to him. Stephen, the one that actually said that you need to do some balance work, he says, how would you address subconscious behaviors? For example, that client that binge eats when watching Netflix, but has no idea that they're eating and perhaps even denies it.
Yeah, absolutely. So denial is a difficult thing because it maybe means they're not at the stage where they are actually ready to change. So this is where the values kick in, or this is where creating a discrepancy kicks in. So maybe you ask that person, have your family members noticed anything, or you might have noticed that when you're training them that they have a certain action. Again, it comes back down to environment. So if they have disclosed that they are a binge eater or they binge under certain circumstances, let's look at what is the chain of events that leads to that. So I'm binge watching this amazing series on Netflix, and every time I'm doing it, I'm always eating, blah, blah, blah. Okay, can we change the time of day that you do that? Can we wait an extra hour? Can you have dinner first? Or can you eat a little bit further back in the day to then give you that little bit of a gap? Or is it literally that person's always going to want to eat whilst watching movies? Cool. Is there something else they can eat?
Yeah.
Because if you want to binge on carrots, binge on broccoli.
Yeah. Heidi, you did a great post, so thank you very much. I've already reposted it. Heidi Windridge. So she's tagged you in as well, David. So that's good. She's asking, are there any good books that you can recommend?
Yes. So here are the people that you should go and look at when you're looking at behavior change and habit. Someone who is, in fact, I can put it in the chat.
Yeah.
How does that sound? So one of the people to look for is Gretchen Rubin. So Gretchen Rubin has done lots of good stuff on personality and how people are going to respond to your influence. So are they going to shut you out or are they going to take you in? Yeah, so it's quite good for really good for coaches. The kind of granddaddy of one of the granddaddies of behavior change is Albert Bandura. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he has done some epic stuff. He comes from a kind of place of behavior change and how to actually listen, which is one of the big things. The other good source, if I can spell.
As he's typing, just someone said, "What's the email address to put your questions in?" I've also put my email address in the chat box. Over to you, David.
The Decision Lab is a really cool website. I'm not sure I'm putting these in the group chat, but hopefully they're popping up.
Yeah, that's better to put in the chat rather than the question bit. Oh, this is a great one. So as trainers, is it necessary, the word is necessary, for us to get a separate certification for behavior change?
Yeah, so what I would say is, one of the things we'll be talking about when I finally create my motivational interviewing course for FitPro, we'll be thinking about your scope of practice. So what is within your scope of practice and what is not. So if someone comes to you that has an addiction or an eating disorder, think, what is my scope of practice? Can I actually help that person safely? So there are lots of different behavior change courses that you can go on, that various companies do. And again, you can DM me and I can sort of direct you in the right way. But again, some of the points that I'll be putting across in the new course I'll be developing is how to understand your scope of practice. So I think having some behavior change will definitely help you with clients, especially for retention. But I think it's definitely important to understand your scope of practice for sure. It took me far too long to go on the behavior change type route as a PT. I should have done it straight away.
I love that. So people are saying, why can't we see what he's typing? Because he had got it set to just type to me, so I was seeing it.
That's
So
what it is. Okay.
it's all right. I've copied it, so I think I've got all of your stuff, so that's good. So is there right? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. My God, this is so exciting. God, right? Okay, Daryl. Daryl is always on our webinars, so thank you. Says a really great explanation of habits, and I've just realised there are habits for life and habits used to meet goals. But it's about making those goal habits sustainable so they ultimately become mainstream. So a habit of calorie deficit shouldn't be a long-term habit. So can you talk about perhaps short-term, long-term,
So the thing to investigate is called chunking, if you can understand the accent. So chunking is that short term. So can I make those small changes that will lead to long-term change versus, I'm going to cut 500 calories out of my diet. We know it doesn't really work for the majority of people. And every single piece of research will tell you that it needs to be small, sustainable changes. So cutting out 20 calories a day is a way more sustainable, but you guys know that already. But if you look into chunking, that's probably where the research is going. That's kind of what it gets called, is chunking, looking at small incremental change.
I like the way you say that with your accent.
Yes, chunking.
Chunking. I always am careful. This is D saying this. I'm always careful not to seem to nag about obvious overeating. I work a lot with older adults who often want to lose weight. Have you got any thoughts on that when we sort of put over our own thoughts, like nagging, and also there was another question which I'll link in. A lot of clients see these quick fixes.
Yes.
So thoughts on that, not nagging.
Yeah, so from in terms of the quick fixes, it's really difficult these days because you have to act as a filter for what people see. So you need to act as a filter for the information So because there's TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and the internet, this didn't happen when I first became a PT. You were the source of information. So you need to really be good at filtering information for them, not to discount what they're saying, but ask them to think about it logically. So you need to try and help them build a kind of skeptical mind, not a cynical one, because we can start being cynical because we start nagging at them and we think, blah, blah. Be skeptical rather than cynical. So it's about trying to make those, it's not an argument, it's not a discussion. You need to listen to what they're saying and then repeat it back to them. Repeat it back to them and ask them how that sounds. Yeah, so then hopefully when it's repeated back to them, they start to hear it. But again, this is all behavior change. It's not straightforward. It's not simple. You will get frustrated, but it's about listening as much as possible and trying to direct them and guide them rather than this is the information. This is what you should be doing.
Okay, I've got 2 more questions. Anna and
Amazing.
Heidi, we're going to do these very quickly. We've still got 155 people with us. I'm mindful of the time. Anna, quickly, can repetition number also be a bias?
In terms of
I'm assuming
exercises.
Yeah, I think that must be to do with the lunge. Do you remember?
Yeah. So yeah, well, it should really be scientifically based rather than bias based. It should be for what that person needs. If it's explosive strength or it's strength endurance, let's just go with what the science says. But yeah, some people can be biased in terms of I'm going to keep going until I collapse, or I need to do 1,000 reps. What does the science say for that person's goal? If that person's goal doesn't match what you're asking them to do, then there's no point.
And Heidi, is there any research regarding age and habit forming? Is it harder for older clients to form new habits, perhaps?
Not necessarily, because they're actually in a relatively fixed context. So they're maybe less likely to be moving around. They're maybe less likely to have a new job. They're maybe so it's those sometimes those things can spark a new habit. So if I move house or I move job, there's a different environment for me to be in, which can be helpful. But also if something's really ingrained with someone who is older, it can be slightly difficult. But what we're thinking about is, can we build a new behavior rather than trying to totally destroy the other one? So it's about just trying to turn the volume up on the new one. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of research in terms of people who are retirement age. It tends to be people that are, most of the research comes from things like addictions and eating disorders, and those focus tend to be on a younger population, if I'm honest. But yeah, if you've got an older client walking around the gym, they might be doing the same thing for the last 50 years. It can be tricky to talk to that person. But again, listen rather than talk.
Lovely. We've had some really lovely comments. I know so many of you have to go. I'm sure David also has to go. And I've got to go and do my nose picking. Apparently I do. Thanks.
Yes, you've got loads of that.
I've got loads of that to catch up with.
Loads.
I want to say a massive thank you. All these lovely chats are coming through. David, just a beautifully done education. I'm very grateful that you've done this for us. I know Active IQ are as well. I want to give a shout out to Active IQ for putting this sort of series together as well. As I said right at the beginning, for me, everything in our industry is about collaboration and sharing and having these curious minds that you all have by turning up and for this first of these webinar series. So remember, you can contact us, teresa.w@fitpro.com. Follow us on socials and follow that guy because he's pretty good, isn't he? Anyway, we're going to sign out, everybody. And if you've got anything that you want us to touch on in the series, we've got a few already scheduled in, and you'll be finding out about that very soon. David, should we do a cheesy wave to finish with?
See you, pals.
Please, everybody be doing a cheesy wave at home as well. Goodbye.
Bye.